Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, "God doesn't give us everything that we want, but He does fulfill His promises, always leading us down the best and the straightest paths that lead to Himself." He's not like the so-called gods of pagan religions throughout human history, the gods we see in the Old Testament, the gods of the Canaanites and the Moabites and the Philistines and of all the nations surrounding the people of Israel, gods who they thought could be begged and bribed and manipulated and coerced into doing what they wanted Him to do. The God of the Bible is different. He came to His people. He chose them. He delivered them from slavery. He brought them to Himself so that He could be their God who lives and walks among them. He did that so that they could find life in Him, and so that through them, all the nations of the earth would be drawn to Him and find life in Him as well. God didn't save us to give us everything we want. He saved us to give the fullness of Himself. We see that in today's reading from 1 Chronicles 10 to 14. Back in 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel came to Samuel the prophet, and they said, "Give us a king so that we can be like all the nations around us, so that we can have a king who we can rely on, who will lead us and fight all of our battles for us." The Lord said the reason they're asking for that is because they were rejecting Him as their king. But in this case, He gave them what they wanted in order to lead them to what they needed. So Saul becomes king, and all of Israel celebrates. And at least for a short time, he was a good king who served the Lord and who served his people. But Saul became so self-absorbed, and soon it was very clear that he wasn't serving the Lord, and he wasn't serving the people of Israel. Saul was serving Saul, and in his mind, Israel was his kingdom. So the Lord told Saul that He's going to remove him from his throne and that He's going to replace him with a man who is after the heart of God, a king who will lead God's people in God's ways. In today's reading in chapter 10, we see the tragic end of Saul's life. He gets wounded in battle, and then in fear, he falls on his own sword and takes his life. Chapter 11, then David becomes king, and the people recognize that he was the true leader of God's people. They say, "Even when Saul was king, it was you who led us. It was you who God chose to be the shepherd of His people." The contrast between them is very clear. 1 Samuel 18, we're told that the Lord had departed from Saul. But in chapter 11, verse 9 of today's reading, it says David's kingdom became greater and greater because the Lord was with him. Chapter 13, David calls the people together and says we need to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, because during the reign of Saul, Israel wasn't faithfully seeking the Lord. You see, Saul's concern was always Saul. Even when Samuel confronted him for his disobedience in 1 Samuel 15, he wasn't repentant. All he was thinking about was his reputation. He said to Samuel, "Please come back with me and honor me in the sight of all the people." In contrast, in today's reading, chapter 14, verse 2 says, David realized that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, not for David's sake, but for the sake of the people of Israel. David knew that God didn't exist to build David's kingdom, and that the people of Israel didn't exist to serve David. David knew that he was king in order to build God's kingdom, in order to be a representative of God before the people and to serve them for the purposes of God. Saul represented what the people wanted, a king who they thought would lead them into a better life. David represented what the people needed, the fulfillment of God's promises to do whatever is necessary to lead people down a path that leads to Him. And He didn't just do that through the 40 years of David's reign, but David's reign points ahead to the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises in Christ, the Son of David, who would give His life to bring us to God so that we could find life in Him as His people.